Da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, da da da, da da. Wait a minute. The Lonely Man theme sounds suspiciously like My Way by Frank Sinatra. I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this. I did it my way. The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. The Trial of the Incredible Hulk is the second TV reunion movie for Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno's successful TV series, airing in 1989, over 10 years after that show began. I usually don't review sequels before I've reviewed their predecessors, but Jeffrey Patrone requested this one specifically, and it's not like the three TV movies really inform each other very much, at least based on this one. I've never seen these, and I've only watched a handful of episodes from the series, but I don't feel like I've missed anything. And I really doubt if they have much to do with each other. If you've watched the pilot, you're good to go, and even that's not really necessary. There's a recap voiceover at the beginning, which amusingly doesn't include any material from the last movie, The Return of the Incredible Hulk. It just sets up the premise of the TV show, showing key bits of the origin for the umpteenth time. It doesn't matter that Hulk met Thor last time we saw him. That's not going to inform this movie at all. David Bruce Banner, with the name change according to Stan Lee because studio executives thought Bruce sounded too homosexual, faked his death when he accidentally transformed himself into the Hulk in a lab experiment. And he's still wandering around the country, keeping a low profile and reluctantly helping people along the way, trying to keep the personification of his dark side at bay. He's still sad and brooding and lonely, thus the Lonely Man theme. We haven't messed with the formula or the status quo in a decade, why start now? This time, Banner is in a small town just outside New York City, doing manual labor and getting picked on by his idiot coworkers. I don't know why. Maybe they just think his beard is silly. I think it makes him look distinguished. Bill Bixby should have rocked that beard the whole show. The only person in town who seems to care about him is, of course, a pretty lady he's not having a relationship with. I think she's finding jobs for vagrants. She tells him there's plenty of other work he could be doing and he should stop moving all the time. He has to stop someplace. He throws that line back at her and says that's just what he plans on doing, in the city. I don't really know why he wants to go there, except that that's where the events of this movie are going to take place. She calls it a bad place, and in this world, it really is. It turns out it's the Marvel Comics version of New York City, and a lot of it is controlled by none other than Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, though, like in first season Daredevil on Netflix, he's never referred to by that moniker. That lady was absolutely right. David is not in town for an afternoon before he gets thrown in jail awaiting trial for trying to sexually assault a woman on the subway. Don't worry, Banner is lost and hardly has the will to live. I wonder if I can get the lyrics to Suicide is Painless to fit in the melody for the Lonely Man theme, but he's not that far gone. David is set up by the psycho who really did try to take advantage of Ellie Mendez, the girl on the subway, and our obligatory damsel in distress, and that guy works for Fisk, and Fisk can't have loose ends. I don't know how he's kept such a tight grip on New York, hiring conspicuous sexual assaulters who grab women on the subway in front of everyone and declare them as their wives. I guess he's just gotten really lucky. So Fisk sends guys to kill Ellie and sets Banner up to take the fall. Banner, who always has an alias, here he's going by David Belson, is defended by none other than Matt Murdock, which in and of itself isn't too convenient. Matt is trying to take Fisk down, and if he can get David to testify against the nutjob who decides to make the first hot chick he sees on the train his wife, he can get to the thug, who might confess to working with Fisk. The silly, convenient thing is that Banner sees Matt across the street seconds after he arrives in the city before they're ever in an interrogation room together. Because, you know, New York is a real small town and everyone knows your name, like Cheers. So that's the setup. Banner won't cooperate because he's afraid if he's put under pressure on the witness stand, the Hulk will come out. And Matt is desperate to make him testify because Fisk has a chokehold on the city, and he finally has an avenue to do something about it. And within the legal system, which he's had to work outside of as Daredevil because there's so much corruption in every government body in the city. Impressively, the stakes feel high, and there's some real tension and intrigue in the setup. Ellie's situation is not unlike Karen Page's in the first season of the Netflix show, where Fisk tries to have her killed for what she knows. Except here, he tries to murder the woman in a hospital, not a prison, and she's forced to implicate Banner because the thugs threaten to kill her family, rather than being framed for a crime herself. Ellie stops claiming Banner tried to assault her after Fisk tries to have her killed again. Fisk is constantly tying up loose ends, so you never know who might be in the wrong place at the wrong time and will wind up a victim of the conspiracy, and what cops or lawyers or judges might be on the take or blackmailed into working for Fisk. I had no idea this kind of story was told with Daredevil 25 years before Marvel did it on Netflix. It's not as sophisticated as the Netflix series, of course, but this is overall a pretty authentic Daredevil story, influenced heavily by the then-recent Frank Miller run, and all the trappings of that are here. I knew Matt Murdock was in this story, and I've seen pictures of the black suit, which is really similar to the one Matt wears before he gets his red duds in the Netflix show, and wears again throughout Season 3. But I had no idea it was a bona fide backdoor pilot for a show that never got made, and honestly, wouldn't have been half bad based on this. Sure, Rex Smith is no Charlie Cox, and sure, there's some cheesy dialogue and ham-fisted acting here. And also, this Wilson Fisk is a cartoon character who lets his Wesley-like right-hand man sabotage his plans at the end by refusing to kill the girl and keeps him on his payroll for no reason beyond he is the only one Fisk forgives. But ask me if I'd rather watch 13 episodes of this or Iron Fist. Really, ask me. The street-level grit is, of course, tame by today's standards, but for the day it feels sufficiently gritty, especially for network television. There's some legitimate suspense, like the scene where Banner's cellmate, a man hired by Fisk, tries to murder him with a metal spike. Fisk apparently has control of a lot of the prison population, as we see one guy sneak the spike into a janitor's cart through the bars of his cell, and then the janitor rolls the cart down the hall until he gets to Banner's cell, where Banner's cellmate takes it and waits for the right moment to strike. He lies in the bunk under Banner and nearly drives the spike through Banner's back. But, of course, at just the last second, a guard comes to get Banner to talk to one of the only clean cops in town, Deputy Chief Tindelli. The timing is convenient, but it's well shot, and it actually got me. I thought the spike might go through him and he'd transform into the Hulk. The movie sometimes captures the tension and paranoia that was Miller's signature in the comics, which is a pleasant surprise. And there's some pretty excellent lighting and shadow work, particularly toward the end, with Daredevil in costume as he makes his way through Fisk's penthouse and takes out his men. Not to mention some ambitious superhero stuff, like when he ziplines from one building to Fisk's tower, with a suction cup grip, no less. It's funny how it's difficult to have historical perspective on some things because they change so much over time, but how occasionally something will be in vogue again and you don't need historical perspective at all. If I showed a Daredevil fan this movie 10 years ago, he'd be like, hey, that's not Daredevil's costume. He's just wearing a lame, thrown-together burglar outfit or something. I remember seeing pictures of it years ago and thinking it was an odd choice, like the production maybe just didn't think they could make a red suit look good, or they didn't want to go too superhero, so they went with something really safe. I thought Daredevil looked like a jewel thief. But now it's cool. He's wearing almost exactly what he does through most of Season 1 Daredevil, and then in Season 3. And the makeshift suit with the mask that covers his eyes because he doesn't see is a little more intimidating. Imagine going up against a guy with the raw nerve to cover his eyes. I mean, even if the cloth is see-through, it would feel like you were fighting a guy who's saying, I can beat you with my eyes shut. As far as I know, the Trial of the Incredible Hulk does that suit first, and Miller is homaging it in Man Without Fear, which came out 4 years after this. So we have costume designer Judy Truchan to thank for what has become a pretty iconic look for the character. I imagine most people would go back to this now and go, oh, he's wearing that first suit. It must be early Daredevil. I mean, it's not. He seems to have been doing this long enough that he's a major pain in Fisk's side, but it looks legit today in a way it wouldn't have as much even back then, except for maybe the weird red things on his hands. I don't know what that's about. I really thought Daredevil in this would be like Spider-Man in the 1978 series. He's got his name and powers, and that's about it. It was a treat to see more or less comic book Daredevil, complete with a pretty faithful origin, motivations, and with his arch-nemesis. That was my biggest surprise. I had no idea Wilson Fisk was even in this, and neither is just a generic character with the same names. They both have the same broad characterizations, methods, and motivations they do in the source material. Daredevil is made a little more innocent and a lot less conflicted than he is in Miller's comics. He's not tortured by his father's death so much as just initially motivated by it. When he reveals his identity to Banner and tells him his origin story, which includes the broad strokes of his father's background, he was a boxer, organized crime tried to control, and he refused to cooperate, so he was killed, but we don't see it in flashback. Matt tells Banner that he's not out for revenge. I don't go out to punish anyone, he says. I do it to protect. He feels totally justified in taking the law into his own hands. There's none of the soul-searching Matt has in the Netflix show about whether he's going too far in brutalizing criminals or whether he's a hypocrite for trying to uphold the integrity of the law as a lawyer, but then admitting that the law isn't enough as a vigilante. And none of the religious component either. This Matt basically says the playing field just isn't level, and so he has no choice. Banner says, but you're an attorney. What about the law? Matt responds with, they've corrupted the law, and he's just comfortable enough in his convictions not to be corrupted by his power, I guess. It also helps that Matt has a friend on the police force from the very beginning, and that's Tindelli, the deputy chief I mentioned earlier. This is the part of the origin I really don't care for, and it's also one of the funniest and most facepalm-inducing moments in the movie. Oddly, we don't get any flashbacks to Matt's father or the incident with the truck that splashes him with chemicals, though that's all talked about and pretty much the same as in the comics and in the TV show. Matt shoves an old guy out of the way, saves his life, but gets hit with radioactive material that takes his sight and heightens his other senses. But we do get flashbacks to 10 years ago, when Matt decides to become Daredevil. He doesn't start training until he's 24, which is pretty unrealistic even for this material, and he doesn't have Stick or anyone else to train him. He just gets this acrobatic and good at hand-to-hand combat and at throwing his club all by himself. Although I guess the Ben Affleck movie kind of does that too. But at least there he starts as a little kid. But the thing I really don't like is the very idea to become a vigilante because the system has been too corrupted to fix it from the inside doesn't come from him, it comes from Tindelli. Matt just happens to be standing on the steps of City Hall while Tindelli is giving a press conference. Tindelli point-blank says how much of the police force he thinks is corrupt, which honestly makes me wonder how he's still alive in that town for another decade. You'd think Fisk would be after him the same way he's after Daredevil. And he says that someone needs to work outside the law to fix the problem. Someone who can't be killed off or paid off, he says. And then, here it comes, he says, a Daredevil, if you will. He gives Matt the idea, the justification, and the name, all in like 3 sentences. So as close to comic book Matt Murdock as the movie gets, and even though Rex Smith does have some charisma and charm in the role, and I think he might have really grown into it if this had spawned a TV show, it's deflated a little in the fact that he has no original ideas of his own. And in the flashback, when Daredevil reveals himself to Tindelli, the deputy chief just nods and smiles, like he somehow knows his speech inspired this random guy in a ninja suit and can somehow be sure he's fighting on the right side of the law. I mean, for all Tindelli knows, this guy could be working for Fisk and has come to kill him, especially because after that speech, he should be the most paranoid person in New York City. Sometimes it feels impressively gritty and realistic, and sometimes it's 8 shades of goofy. When a nurse who's on Fisk's payroll tries to kill Ellie in her hospital room, because you never know when you might need a nutso nurse to murder somebody, Daredevil shows up and fights her, and not only does she go all kung fu on him, but he runs her into some medical equipment which sparks and smokes and electrocutes her, like a console on the Enterprise. It just explodes for no reason. It's a little tonally uneven, to say the least. Wilson Fisk is also like the comic book version in that he runs all the crime in the city and he has so much of local government bought and paid for. He sits up in his penthouse apartment where no one ever sees him and he plots and schemes for more power, running major crime operations remotely sitting in front of a bunch of monitors. And he's big, heavyset, and foreboding, though not bald. The big difference, though, is that this version is obsessed with acting and thinks of himself like a movie director. If this Wilson Fisk did have a supervillain name, it wouldn't be the Kingpin, it would be the Director. When he kidnaps Ellie, he tells her he wishes she was an actor rather than a teacher. "I have a part for you to play," he says, "the part of a princess who must be rescued." Later, he talks about the part he has for Daredevil, too, the dead hero who will prove to all the other mob bosses in the country that Fisk should run all the crime. All the crime! The events of the city are just one big movie he's directing, and he keeps Ellie in an old abandoned movie studio. He dresses like and has the look of a Hollywood director. He's always wearing sunglasses, he sits in a mechanical swivel chair and directs diamond heists. It could be brought more to the forefront. It didn't occur to me that's what the movie was doing with him until I started writing about it here. And I think that's because it doesn't really come from any place. Fisk never talks about directors or movies he admires. He's real theatrical and Shakespearean. He has a real all the world's a stage kind of attitude. But he never invokes the bard. It's just used as a theme to go with his might makes right philosophy. He is on top of the world, like a god reigning from Olympus, so everyone else must play the parts he gives them. And a lot of TV is made in New York, so that might be partly why he thought to do that. But it makes him colorful and kind of distinct, and if he's not going to be the terrifying, streetwise but cultured figure of the comics, at least he's not the exact same mob boss I've seen in a million TV shows. He has several fun speeches and lines of dialogue. My favorite is when he brings all the mob bosses to his penthouse and is about to show them footage of the alleged death of Daredevil, which is really just footage of Daredevil getting knocked out. He gets rescued by the Hulk and he's about to crash Fisk's party, but Fisk doesn't know that. And Fisk gives this speech to his guests. "An octopus cannot operate with just legs. It needs a head. I submit myself as master of all our tentacles. The following is my resume." Fisk is played in a sort of Orson Welles style by John Rhys Davies, who played the recurring hologram version of Leonardo da Vinci in Star Trek Voyager and Gimli in the Lord of the Rings films. I had no idea those two characters were played by the same actor until I looked him up, and his voice seemed really familiar here, but I couldn't place him. He's clearly having a blast chewing the scenery and going for a totally mustache-twirling performance. I think he could have been more fleshed out had this spawned a Daredevil series, create a little character dimension behind the theatricality, give him a background, and make us understand how he became such a heartless tyrant. But I like that we have a real supervillain here, and this thing is not afraid to go all the way with the comic book stuff. For all its gritty realism earlier in the film, the climax ends with Fisk and his traitorous assistant flying away in a futuristic hovercraft parked on top of Fisk's tower, like he's got his own Fantasticar. It's hysterical, but also pretty ambitious, and it doesn't look bad for a TV budget in 1989. I like that the ending isn't too clean either, as silly as it gets, given that Daredevil had no proof to use against Fisk before this story began, and he's supposed to be so powerful and virtually untouchable. David Banner shows up for a couple of days, and Matt goes from square one to the top of his penthouse, like the theatrical cut of the Ben Affleck movie, where suddenly word's out on the Kingpin. How did that happen? I'm sure he escapes in case Daredevil gets his own show, which was the producer's intent, so I shouldn't give it too much credit for that. But I did spend the whole movie worrying this would be a tear down the system kind of story, and I was relieved when that didn't happen, as close as our heroes get. Throughout much of the film, it feels like Daredevil's story with the Hulk as a guest star, and that was probably a letdown for Incredible Hulk fans. That is a problem, but in the movie's defense, it's at least co-produced and directed by Bill Bixby himself, so the guy playing the title role has a say in what story they're telling, and presumably he likes the Daredevil focus. And it might be a Leonard Nimoy situation. He might not want to be in front of the camera as much as he usually is, since he's pulling double duty. The Hulk himself is a little shafted, given that Banner doesn't change at all in the climax, and that is a narrative problem, but I don't think David Banner is shafted at all, story-wise, even if he doesn't get as much screen time as I might like. He and Matt get paralleling character arcs, both helping each other to find peace with who and what they are. Kind of. That's what it's supposed to be. It's a little muddied at the end. But it's not just an arc for Matt with Banner tagging along. Banner has to find his will to live and be reminded that he really does care about other people, not just making sure he doesn't hurt them. When Ellie first gets harassed by the thug on the subway, she asks for Banner's help, asks to sit beside him so she won't get singled out by the dingbat who clearly wants to make trouble, but Banner declines. It's only when the thug has Ellie on her feet and is threatening her that he finally intervenes. Banner learns from Matt, as he sees Daredevil use his gifts to fight Fisk, that he shouldn't let his weaknesses in the things that make him a liability hold him back from doing the right thing. Or he's even more of a liability than just taking the risk of letting the Hulk out. So as much time as we spend establishing Daredevil's world and his powers and his motivations, there is still a Hulk story here. The bigger problem is the film's title. If Daredevil's name was there along with the Hulk's, and if the title wasn't so misleading in the first place, fans might not have been as irritated. Because the trial of the Incredible Hulk has almost nothing to do with the movie, and it promises a very different story from the one we get. A Daredevil-Hulk team-up, and one that parallels the characters and abilities of the men, is a great idea. It would have never occurred to me to compare these heroes the way this movie does. They're both given handicaps because of radiation, but they both get gifts too. But if you know the show at all, the idea of the Hulk being put on trial is provocative. It suggests that Banner might finally be outed as the Hulk, and a jury might have to decide whether Banner himself is responsible for any of the Hulk's actions. There's a great ethical debate to be had there. Should Banner have to answer for what the personification of his dark side does? And is he culpable by omission? Should he be punished, if he even can be punished without letting the beast out, because he didn't tell anyone he was the Hulk, thus risking the lives of people everywhere he went? Or did he do the right thing by trying to avoid people as much as he could and minimize the damage, which might arguably have been greater if he let himself be put under a microscope? But I'm sorry, I'm analyzing a movie that didn't get made. This isn't about any of that. We have to keep status quo exactly the same until the last movie, and that's because we kill him off there. I've never seen The Death of the Incredible Hulk, but as far as I understand it, that title is not like this one. It's actually descriptive. He really does die there. But not only is the movie not centered around a trial for David Banner like I thought it might be, I figured naturally Matt Murdock was here as a supporting character to defend Banner, and a lot of it would be a courtroom drama. There's no trial at all. There's one courtroom scene, which is the most Hulk carnage in the whole movie, and the whole thing turns out to be a dream sequence. Like I mentioned earlier, Banner is worried that he'll turn into the Hulk if he goes on the stand, but he can't tell Murdock what's at stake, only that he changes, which isn't enough for Matt to go on. So Matt insists he goes on the stand, practically screaming in desperation, "You must answer!" And so Banner has a dream where that happens. He's too stressed out by the prosecution and the judge, both yelling the same thing at him. "You must answer!" And they're really over the top about it, too. So he turns into Lou Ferrigno and goes on a rampage in the courtroom. It's really entertaining, and especially exciting when I thought it was actually, what was happening. And it's a letdown when you find out none of it's real. Partly because the title is lying to you, and partly because the transition getting there is such a tease. The movie doesn't play fair with its audience here. We go from a character being yelled at by his defense attorney, Matt, to the same character in a courtroom yelled at by the prosecution. Both scenes are about Banner refusing to tell the truth, and they're both about his being on the witness stand. It watches like a standard time passes transition. It is ridiculous to jump from one scene to the next, focusing on the same character, and reveal that one of those scenes was in reality and the other was a dream. And there aren't really any clues in the dream sequence to let you in on this. I suspect the insane way both attorneys are acting is supposed to be a tell, but there's so much melodrama and over-the-top acting in the rest of the movie, it didn't feel any more out of place than it does when Ellie gives her soap opera speech to Fisk when she first gets kidnapped, her "I'm a person and my name is Anakin" speech, and my favorite overacting moment in the whole movie. It's also Ellie's, when Banner turns into the Hulk at the abandoned movie studio and Daredevil is trying to rescue her. Hulk starts thrashing guys, and Ellie lets out this inhuman, feral scream, "What is happening?" It's unfortunate and counterintuitive that this backdoor Daredevil pilot, complete with a supporting cast of co-workers who help him with his cases, none of whom I've ever heard of, has no scenes of Matt actually working in the courtroom. Oh, and that dream sequence is where the Stan Lee cameo is. So that makes Stan Lee a figment of David Banner's imagination. I do appreciate that the dream sequence isn't just there to make us think the inappropriate title matters, though. At least it spurs the narrative onward. Banner gets enraged enough in the dream, it makes him turn into the Hulk in real life. So we go from a big monster rampage in a dream to another one in real life, where Hulk breaks out of the cell and puts a pretty impressive hole in the side of the building. That makes it feel less lame, and I like that it's not totally pointless, but of course it's gotta be like this so we don't change the situation too much. Now the cops think a big monster broke Banner out of prison, not that he turned into said monster. We are led to believe, though, that things might finally change for Banner by the end, when he sort of takes an opportunity for change and decides to be more proactive, hoping to go find himself a cure instead of just moping down the highway, trying never hard enough not to get into trouble. Even though the movie ends the way every episode I've seen does. He's still sadly walking along the side of the road, hitchhiking. It's an awkward ending for a couple of reasons. First, when Matt opened up to him earlier in the movie, taking his Daredevil mask off and giving him his life story, hoping Banner would open up to him, Matt asked Banner if there's any chance he could ever regain his sight. Banner is a scientist and knows radiation, so who better to ask? After hearing a really generalized story, asking no questions at all, and giving Matt's eyes a cursory once-over, Banner bluntly says no. He doesn't know what the chemicals are, he doesn't know what kind of radiation Matt was affected with, but he is confident there's no way he could ever be healed. But after Matt reminds Banner he has something to contribute, he decides to try to rid himself of the Hulk. You're positive, with zero details at all, that Matt can't be cured, but after 10 years, you're finally gonna try to fix yourself? Matt should be like, wait a minute, what about me? I suppose maybe Matt doesn't want to be cured anymore after his somewhat forced character arc. Oddly, it feels like a Daredevil movie before a Hulk movie, but Banner has the more natural character arc. Matt is totally confident in his handicap and his powers all the way through, until he's lured into Fisk's trap and gets bombarded with distracting sensory input. Lights flash, and there's a high-pitched whine that totally takes him out of commission. This is Fisk's foolproof plan, by the way. Fisk is so confident he can get Daredevil there by kidnapping this girl he tried to kill that he calls a meeting with the mob bosses to show them footage of the death of his nemesis before he even has it. I'm getting off track here, but bear with me. So I guess he would have just used someone else if Ellie died, because this plan predates her getting involved. I guess Fisk's plans are really malleable. And to be fair, he almost gets away with it. If Banner didn't turn into the Hulk and take out all his men, he'd have been a goner. But it's not like Fisk neutralizes him with loud noise because he knows he's blind and his senses are heightened. He just tries a bunch of stuff, and that happens to paralyze Daredevil. I just don't know why Fisk is so confident this will work, and why he never thought to try it before. Anyway, back to my original point. In a really manufactured turn, Matt is suddenly really insecure about his weakness, getting super depressed and practically ready to give up just because Fisk almost took him out so easily, with loud noises. Matt turns into a completely different character in that moment just to force the comparison between him and Banner and to give Banner an easy out to complete his arc. Matt showed David that he could turn a negative into a positive and that he should still do the right thing despite his handicap. Banner reminds Daredevil that he doesn't just have a weakness, he has a gift, and he has a responsibility to use it for good. He says what I did. Fisk doesn't know he's blind, and if he had sight, he would have been hit with those lights anyway. It might have been the same outcome. He can't feel bad for his drawbacks because we all have them. The difference he doesn't go into, and this is where the kindred spirit thing breaks down for me, is that Banner did this to himself. He has a reason to feel guilty about the Hulk in a way Matt doesn't about his blindness. Banner got his condition in a selfish, impulsive act, consequence of a mistake. Matt got his powers trying to help someone, consequences of doing the right thing. And there often is a guilty component to Matt's character, but this isn't about his father's death or anyone that he's responsible for having gotten hurt in his fight against Fisk. This is just Matt moping about his powers, like Banner mopes about the Hulk. The situations aren't really the same at all, and I'm not buying Matt's depression about it. So when Daredevil regains some of his confidence and gets really close to taking out Fisk, especially jumping through the footage of his ostensible death as the mob bosses are watching it, which is awesome, I guess it makes sense if he's not thinking anymore about trying to get his sight back. But it does make me wonder what Banner has really learned, and what he was really talking about when he says Matt reminded him he had something to contribute. He talks about Matt's gift, and it seems like he's equating the Hulk with Matt's heightened senses. After all, it was the Hulk that saved Matt at the movie studio. But the Hulk doesn't help him in the Fisk building. That's all Banner. And if it's supposed to be about his road to redemption, including using the Hulk as a positive force, then it's a big mistake not to include the Hulk in that scene. The big result of David's taking his opportunity for change is that he's going to stop running and start doing something to make a difference, like he didn't do on the subway for Ellie, and like he refused to do for Matt when he wouldn't go on the witness stand, making it all about him and his guilt, while it only led to making problems worse and giving him more things to be guilty about. Now that's a solid arc, but what he decides to do is to try to get rid of the Hulk, which is just confusing. So then I guess he wasn't talking about the Hulk when he talked about gifts? Was he talking about science? Is that his gift? But then when the Hulk saves Matt, and Matt finds out David transforms into the Hulk, how does that lead to his deciding to change his behavior? What is the correlation there? About midway through, it feels like the movie is really onto something in putting these guys together and pointing out their similarities, but then it doesn't stick the landing. That ending is really messy. It's a solid pilot for a show that unfortunately was never produced. It feels like a real Marvel Universe story, and as hokey as it is in places, it has flashes of real grit and real heart. But the title is false advertising, it doesn't always play fair with the audience, and the parallel character arcs don't live up to a promising beginning. I'm going to give The Trial of the Incredible Hulk a 2.5 out of 4. Tune in tomorrow to find out what I've been gifted to review for the second of the 12 Days of Superhero Rewind, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to support the channel, go to patreon.com/Geekvolution, and for just $2 a month, you can get regular episodes of Superhero Rewind 3 days early. You can also get access to Geekvolution After Dark, my and Eric's uncensored talk show that we do every couple of weeks, and lots more great perks at different tiers on Patreon. At the $10 tier, you can become a Patreon producer, and I'd like to say thanks to all of our producers right now, including Dylan Muschiello, Nick Manna, Eamon Singleton, Cletus Winslow, Remy LeBlanc, Derek Jacob, The Day Ghost, Michael Gulick, Magpie's Nest Productions, Kareem Roberts, Lot 10 Underground, Michael Mark Micheletti, Carl Maxey, Dimitri J., John Johnson, Jacob Schneider, Nathan Handford, Aram Zangana, Joey Couch, Sartaj Govind Singh, Ethan, Guidi, Caleb, Malik Myers, Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Simeon Scott, Justin Hayes, Marie Flowers, Clark Whitfield, Ian McKee, Jeffrey Patron, and Malik Myers. You guys are great, and once again, thanks so much for the support. I'll see everybody tomorrow, same cap time, same cap channel. Thanks so much for listening, and happy holidays.